Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. It's becoming clear that a long trail of official negligence led to the Valentine's Day school shooting in Parkland, Florida. School officials failed, so did the FBI, but Broward County Sheriff Scott Isreal has a distinguished record of exceptional ineptitude and arrogance. Under Israel's leadership, Broward deputies ignored repeated warnings about Nicholas Cruz's violent behavior. The department received at least 23 calls about Cruz or his family. In one call last November, a tipster specifically warned that Nicholas Cruz was, quote, a school shooter in the making, which of course turned out to be sadly true. Sheriff Isreal did nothing. Under Israel's leadership, the department entered an agreement to drastically reduce student arrests. The goal was to eliminate the so-called school-to-prison pipeline, which at the time was a top priority of President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder. The effect was a disaster. Cruz might have been arrested and convicted of a crime. Were it not for that policy, he would never have been able to buy a gun. Once the Parkland shooting began, Israel's deputies refused their most basic duties. Deputy Scott Peterson, whose only job was to protect students at the school, hid while Cruz murdered 17 people. When 3 more Broward deputies arrived, they too took shelter behind their cars rather than try and enter the school and save the lives of children. Scott Isreal is the man in charge of all of this, and of course he's responsible for it. He loudly disagrees. Indeed, Isreal relentlessly brags about himself to all media who will record it. 2 years ago, for example, the local newspaper in Florida reported that Isreal used tax dollars to build a personal political machine, and he clearly had. The evidence was there, stone cold. Confronted with it, Isreal said this, quote, "What have I done differently than Don Shula or Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King or Gandhi?" End quote. And by the way, he said, lions don't care about the opinions of sheep. Stable people don't talk like this, obviously. Something is wrong with Sheriff Isreal. As recently as yesterday, he was refusing to accept any responsibility in the face of his well-documented failures. Watch this exchange.
Do you think that if the Broward Sheriff's Office had done things differently, this shooting might not have happened?
Hey, listen, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, O.J. Simpson would still be in the record books.
I don't know what that means. There's 17 dead people, and there's a whole long list of things your department could have done differently.
Remarkably, it got weirder and worse from there. Watch.
Are you really not taking any responsibility for the multiple red flags that were brought to the attention of the Broward Sheriff's Office about this shooter before the incident, whether it was people near him, close to him, calling the police on him?
Jake, I could only take responsibility for what I knew about. I exercised my due diligence. I've given amazing leadership to this agency.
Amazing leadership?
I've worked. Yes, Jake.
Amazing leadership. And yet the facts suggest that Scott Isreal should not be in charge of anything. And yet he is. Why? Richard Corcoran is the Speaker of the Florida House. He signed a letter calling for Isreal's suspension as Sheriff of Broward County. And he joins us tonight. Mr. Speaker, thanks for coming on.
No, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, Tucker.
So tell us what your letter says and why.
Well, and first, it wasn't just a letter from me. It was a letter from me and 73 of my colleagues, basically representatives accountable for 13+ million people in the state of Florida. And what we sent a letter to the governor saying, under the Constitution, he has the right to remove any local government official, suspend them, and take them out of office. And we said, basically, your authority to do so is if there are malfeasance, misfeasance, incompetence, neglect of duty, of which we believe that Sheriff Isreal scores high on all 4 accounts. So we asked him to suspend him and go down there and take over the investigation and find a replacement. And so 74 of us signed it. The governor immediately, to his credit, called on FDLE, our state law enforcement agency, to go down there and seize the investigation and take over. But we'd still like to see him suspended by the governor, and then ultimately our Florida Senate has the ability to reinstate him or have him be removed completely. And I'm pretty sure, talking to my colleagues in the Senate, they'd remove him completely.
So my guess would be, of the 74 signatories, most or all were Republicans, which raises the question, why is this a partisan issue? So he had 4 deputies with guns at the scene of a school shooting and they refused to help. That's not a partisan question. You don't need to be a Republican to be appalled by that. Why did no Democrats support his removal?
Well, I think we do have the support. It's very difficult, I think, for some of them because many of them are from that geographical area of Broward County.
Right.
A significant portion of our Democratic colleagues. So I think for them, it was like, you're right, go forward. We encourage you. But, signing the the letter was something that was a step too far for them. But they're completely supportive. Whether it's the parents I've talked to of the victims, whether it's our colleagues across the aisle, everyone's disgusted with both his attitude and the investigation and what he's been doing to date.
So my impression is that the deputies who sat outside armed while 17 people were murdered at the school were within their legal rights. They were allowed to do that. Most of us respect law enforcement because we think they're willing to put their lives on the line for us. These people weren't. That seems to me maybe something that the legislature could address. If you're a deputy in charge of protecting the public, shouldn't you be obligated to protect the public?
Yeah, and let me say, Tucker, and I think you would say the same thing. I'm an outside counsel for a sheriff's office as part of my job as an attorney. I can tell you the sheriff's a friend of mine. I know tons of law enforcement officers. Not one single law enforcement officer that I know in that situation wouldn't have gone scrambling into that hallway, up the stairways, whatever it took to try to save those children. What we have here is a poorly run agency. And whether it was the officer on site or the three that came in the car or the officers that went out to his house, as you said, 23 times and never did anything even though he was a threat, whether it was the deal that he entered into with the superintendent of schools that basically said we're going to have a no arrest policy so he can bring guns and knives and bullets to school, all of these things. And the funny thing is this is by his own words. What Sheriff Isreal said is in each one of those situations, the officers outside, the school resource officer inside, the people inside who denied first responders the ability to go help these kids, the agreement and those bullets coming to school. He's got every single person under investigation, but he just want to hold himself accountable for all these people that he has to investigate for their wrongdoing, but he's done none. And the height of arrogance, as you said, Tucker. I mean, the only amazing thing about Sheriff Isreal is his arrogance.
I mean, something's wrong, it seems like. This is not normal behavior. But quickly, in the military, there's a sanction, a penalty for cowardice, because the point is you're not allowed to be a coward. You're in the military, and I think the same would go, wouldn't you say, for a sheriff's deputy or any law enforcement? Most aren't cowards, but for those who are, shouldn't there be some penalty for that?
There should. I mean, we should look at taking away their pensions. If you don't act the way you should in a situation where there are 14 children's lives at stake and 3 adults, absolutely, you should have your pension taken away.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that. Speaker Corcoran, I appreciate coming on tonight.
No, thanks.